Well, alright, I decided that I can just reassemble it and test run this engine before I bother buying any parts for that oil pump assembly. You know, there's a seal in there, so I don't even need to put the clutch or anything on this side. So, got everything put together to the point where I can actually try and start this thing and see how it runs. So, I'm going to do one last thing before I head outside. And what that is I'm going to adjust these carburetor screws, the high and the low speed, to their what is called the basic setting in the service manual. The basic setting is like the initial starting point for where you're going to fine tune from, and that's based on if you've replaced either of these screws. I'm going to do it just because I have no idea what these settings are right now, but I know they're not optimal because of the fact that this thing wouldn't run right. You know, my problem before was I could either run it so that I wouldn't bog when I pulled the trigger, but then it wouldn't idle, or I could adjust it so it would idle, but the RPMs would be very high, and then it wouldn't take off when you pull the trigger. It would just stall. So, just curious to see what these are set at right now. I always forget which one's low and which one's high. So there we go, when the cover's installed. So the rearmost screw is the high and the forwardmost screw is low. It's interesting that on the cover itself they give a guide of high 3/4 of a turn, low 3/4 of a turn. But I think that those are assuming that the limiter caps are on the carburetor, which are these plastic pieces that actually don't allow you to turn these too far either direction. The original carburetor, I think, had the limiter caps on it. This doesn't. Let's see where the low is. So the low was a little over 1 3/4 out. So it was really opened up a lot. So now that's seated. So from there, I want to be out 1 turn. There's 1 full turn. Okay. And then the high speed, that's 2 full turns. So the high speed was out 2 full turns. All right, here's my starting points. Let's take it outside. All right, I expect it to take quite a few pulls for it to fire off at first, just because I haven't run this in a while and the whole fuel system's dry basically. I just put fuel in the tank, but all the lines are empty, and you got to get that charge, that impulse charge from the crankcase actually is what actuates the diaphragm, which is the fuel pump in the carburetor. I don't know. Oh, all right. Try this again. I had spark after I put this back together. I checked the spark before I reassembled everything. So I'm pretty confident I still have spark. We'll get a spark plug wrench. Plug's wet. Alright, it's getting a little breezy out here, so I went in there. I got my dead kitten. Alright. That should help with the wind noise. I cooked this plug a little bit just to dry it out. I'm not convinced that what was on here that was wet was necessarily even fuel. I might have still had some parts cleaner residue that got in there. Didn't smell like gas. Yeah, I don't have enough. I only put a little bit of fuel in there, but sometimes that fuel filter in the tank there gets out of position. Alright, so it sure seems to me like it wants to run and it's just not getting fuel. I think it runs off of this gas I squirt in there, and as soon as this gas is burnt off, it doesn't want to continue running. So I hate to say it, but I think I got to pull this carburetor apart. I haven't worked on this in quite a while, so this carburetor's just been sitting around. I'm wondering whether or not there isn't some deposits inside of it. Just for the hell of it, I threw the original carburetor back on there. And, well, you can see the results. It still will only run off the gas I squirt directly in there and it dies. Alright, so get a load of this. This is the end of the line that goes over to the port where the impulse comes from to drive the fuel pump. And when I put my finger over this, I pull it. I took the spark plug out because I don't think I have to have compression for the impulse to work. I think the impulse comes off the bottom side of the crankcase, if that makes sense. So anyways, with the spark plug out, I can pull it easily and put my finger over this, and I don't feel anything. So I mean, do I really need the spark plug in for the impulse to work? No, I don't think so. Again, it should be on the should be in the crankcase. That's crankcase pressure that should be developing that impulse right here. Nothing. All right, so I put a hose on here and I blew into the hose while cranking the engine, and I could definitely feel the resistance changing, which tells me that my impulse hose didn't come disconnected when I was putting this all back together. I know that I put it on. My concern was that maybe when I was moving it around that somehow it got pulled off, but my impulse hose is connected. The fact that I don't feel a pulse of air on my finger when I pull this, apparently that's not unusual. I guess it's more when the engine's running that it creates that, so go figure. Comment if you think that that's not correct. So now I just rigged up a little fitting here so that I can hook up to my fuel inlet line, and I want to see if I can use the vacuum that I can develop with this little container to draw fuel up through the tank. This is a new line, so it shouldn't be the problem, but I was able to draw some fuel up. I don't know, I would have thought that'd be a lot easier. Alright, so that previous start attempt was actually me with the original carburetor back on. This is the carburetor that came with this motor this chainsaw when I got it. And I had replaced it with a, this is a Walbro, and I had replaced it with a cheap Chinese. This carburetor also, as you can see, won't run. So let me go back to the cheap Chinese carburetor and open it up and see if I can see anything. Well, let's start with the fuel pump side, since that seems to be, it doesn't seem to be working. Looks really clean. So does the screen. I'm going to put my little test bottle here right on this port. Fuel inlet. That's clear. So last night, I thought I was onto something because I had found that the fuel filter that was in the tank on the end of the fuel line that's submerged in the tank, that little thing that floats around in there, I noticed that when I took that off, when I tried to blow into it, it was hard to blow through. And then when I tried to pull air through it, it also seemed to really be restricted. I had another one, a little bit different size, but it fit on the hose perfectly fine. And when I blow through that one or sucked air through that one, it was easy, no restriction. So I figured, okay, so the cheap Chinese in-tank filter that came with the last kit that I bought was bad in some way, and it was causing a restriction, and that's my whole problem. I had also taken the carburetor apart, cleaned out every orifice that I could find, but I found no signs of anything being blocked, so I didn't think it was carburetor. So my plan was this morning to come out here and try it, which I'm going to, but I'm kind of pessimistic and disheartened by the whole fact that when I came down this morning, the fuel filter that I had left on the bench that I had taken out that was restricted last night, this morning, after drying out, oddly enough, was easy to blow and suck through. So I don't know why, but we'll give it a shot. If this doesn't work, then I'm at my wit's end and I'm going to have to step away from this project. And if somebody online can help me because they see this video and take pity on me, that would be wonderful. But who knows, maybe it's going to work. So right now I've got no fuel in the tank because I drained it so that I could check that filter situation. The other thing I did was I removed the fuel line completely and inspected it for any holes, rips, tears, any signs that it had become really gummy and was collapsing on itself under suction, which can happen. What happens is the fuel filter does put a little bit of restriction on the line, on the end of the line. So if the fuel pump is trying to suck fuel up and you've got a little bit of a restriction, if you've got a fuel line that has become mushy or gummy, which the E10 additive in the fuel will do that to a lot of these fuel lines, it'll actually collapse on itself and not allow the fuel to flow. And I don't believe it's a fuel contamination issue, which I've had that happen in the past where I had fuel that I thought was good and then, come to find out it had water contamination or whatever in it. I don't believe that's the issue here because, well, when I take this fuel and I directly inject it into the system, my little handy dandy thing here, it does run. So I don't know if I should even bother trying to start it this way or if I should just go right to putting fuel in there to get it running and then hope that starts pulling the fuel up. I forgot my hearing protection. Ha ha ha. So the trick is, if you're going to squirt fuel directly into the carburetor like that to prime it, you should try and make sure the piston is up so that the bottom skirt of the piston is up high enough so that the intake port is open. Okay? Because I think I flooded it, like insta flooded it. Same exact issue as yesterday. Taking the carb completely apart, did nothing. Changing the fuel filter, did nothing. This is just maddening. Well, I decided to go back to, before giving up on this completely, I decided to go back to the basics here and see, take a look at this impulse line, make sure that it didn't come undone. I mean, I didn't think it did, but I'm looking at it now, and it almost looks to me like maybe it's wet with fuel. So maybe there's a crack or hole in it after all. So I've just got it backed out of its spot where it clips into the plastic housing here. And it definitely is still attached to the nipple down there. So I'm going to pop it off of that. See, it's wet in a couple of spots, but I don't know. Now it's all wet down here with fuel, but I think that might be just because I just had this all tipped over. I'm assuming that's fuel. Yeah, it must be fuel. Oh yeah, it's got a tear in it right there. Yeah, you know what though? Tell you what, if I cap off one end of this and I blow into it, I can't get any leakage, even though I can see what looks like a tear. There's a hole right there, I think. How do you like that? There's a hole right here. When I cap this off with my finger and I blow into here, I don't get any air, but then when I move it like this and it kinks, it leaks. It actually has to be held a certain way for it to leak. There it is. Well, I just checked in of the Stihl dealers that are in my area. The two that are open today, neither one of them have it in stock, so they'd have to order it anyways. And it turns out I could order it from Amazon and have it here in 2 days anyways, so I ordered it off of Amazon. So I'm gonna have to put this aside until those parts come in. But I mean, that definitely would explain why it's not pumping the fuel. So I'm starting to feel a little better now.